You've probably driven behind a semi grinding through its gears on a long uphill grade, that engine dropping, climbing, dropping again. Ask anybody under 50 and they'll tell you that sound is on its way out. But right now, somewhere in this country, an owner-operator just paid extra for a 1998 Peterbilt with an 18-speed and a clutch pedal. Nobody's putting out a press release about it. Go look at what clean pre-emissions trucks are selling for. So what does that man know that the industry is telling you to forget? And why does it show up on your grocery receipt? Because it does. We'll get to that. In 2026, with somewhere around 80% of new long-haul trucks coming off the line with automated transmissions, veteran drivers are not just holding on to their manuals. Some of them are actively circling back, selling the automatic, buying the stick. The easy explanation is that they're cheap and stubborn. That's what people assume. But that's not the reason, and by the time we're done here, you'll see why. The real answer runs through a federal rule, written back in 1992, a downtime figure that keeps fleet managers up at night, and a piece of American trucking that Eaton is quietly shutting down right now. There are 4 forces behind this, and most people only ever hear the first one. Stick around, because after we break those down, I'm going to walk you through 5 mistakes drivers make when they try to make this switch themselves. Get one of them wrong and it'll cost you more than the automatic ever would have. Let's start with the part almost everyone gets wrong. Ask a driver why he prefers the manual, and the first thing out of his mouth is usually the same. I like to be in control. Now, to most people that sounds like ego. It sounds like an old-timer romanticizing his years behind the wheel of a Kenworth W900. But it's neither pride nor nostalgia. Control in an 18-speed isn't a feeling. It's a measurable advantage, and it shows up the second a load gets heavy. Let me show you what that gearbox actually is, because most explanations you'll find online get the math wrong. An Eaton Fuller 18-speed has a 5-speed front section and a 4-speed auxiliary section behind it. That auxiliary holds a low range, a high range, and a splitter. Down in low range, you've got 5 usable ratios, and every one of them can be split. That's 10. Flip up to high range and you've got 4 ratios, and every one of those splits too. That's 8 more. 10 plus 8. 18 forward speeds out of 1 stick and 2 switches on the knob. At the bottom of that ladder sit the crawler gears, deep enough that a driver can launch 80,000 pounds from a dead stop on an incline without cooking anything. At the top sit the overdrive ratios for running the interstate at 70. And in between, the steps are close enough that the engine barely drops 200 RPM between gears, which means a driver can keep a diesel sitting in its power band all the way up a 7% grade. Now here's what almost nobody outside the industry knows. The flagship automated transmission for heavy haul, Eaton's UltraShift Plus, in the 18-speed configuration, is by Eaton's own description, built on the Eaton Fuller 18-speed manual. The automated future everybody's selling you is the exact same gearbox the old boys are hunting down in salvage yards, with a robot bolted on top of it. And that robot has a real problem at the one moment it matters most. By the manufacturer's own admission, an automated manual has to cut engine torque at launch to protect its own starting clutch. Read that line again, because it's the whole argument in one sentence. When you're loaded heavy, sitting on a grade, at a dead stop, needing every ounce of pull that diesel can give you, the transmission is throttling the engine back on purpose, and the driver doesn't get a vote. On soft ground, in a gravel lot, on a muddy job site, those same units can overheat and cut power to save themselves. That's not a grumpy trucker at a truck stop counter. That's an engineering note from the people who build them. Picture what that means. Out on a mountain descent in January, a misjudged moment on ice locks up the drive axle. 130,000 pounds of load starts to come around behind you. A trailer worth more than the tractor pulling it ends up in a ditch on the shoulder. So when a veteran driver tells you he wants control, what he's really saying is that the cost of being wrong is too high to hand to software that pulls power exactly when he needs it most. And if you ran a Road Ranger for a living, do me a favor and tell me in the comments what gear you started in loaded. I want to see how many of you say third. But if this were only about control, the story would end right there. It doesn't, because the bigger fight happens off the highway entirely, in the repair bay. The repair bay is where the numbers get ugly. An automated manual at the order desk runs about $1,500 to $2,000 more than a comparable stick. That's just the entry fee, and honestly, it's the smallest number in this whole conversation. Think about what's actually sitting inside each one. A manual 18-speed has gears, shafts, and a clutch. 3 categories of parts, refined over 60 years of American freight, and basically bulletproof. The automated version keeps every bit of that, then piles on 2 electromechanical actuators, a transmission control unit, a bank of sensors, a wiring harness running the length of the box, and software. Every one of those additions is a new thing that can fail on a Tuesday in Nebraska. And most of them need specialized diagnostic equipment that a lot of smaller shops, especially out on the 2-lane stretches where you actually break down, simply don't have on the bench. Now, the figure that quietly drives fleet decisions behind closed doors. Allison Transmission publishes a number saying an automated clutch failure on a mixer truck can cost up to $7,500 per truck, per day, in downtime, before a single part gets replaced. And look, Allison sells transmissions, so take that number for what it is. They've got a horse in this race. But even if you cut it in half, it's a wall. For a big fleet running 400 trucks, that's a line item somebody absorbs. For an owner-operator, a downed truck stops the entire business. A week sitting in a gravel lot waiting on an actuator to ship from a regional warehouse is the difference between making the truck payment that month and missing it. Stack that against a rebuilt Fuller sitting on a shop floor. A clutch replacement runs somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000. A full rebuild, $3,000 to $7,000. And there's nothing to diagnose with a laptop. You drop the box, you lay the parts on the bench, you replace what's worn. An older mechanic with a chain hoist and a Saturday can do the whole job in a barn. No dealer appointment, no software subscription, no waiting on a technician who's certified for that specific control unit. And remember what we said about Eaton's flagship. The most advanced heavy-haul automated unit Eaton builds sits on that same Eaton Fuller manual gearbox. The transmission underneath is the exact one bolted into that 1998 Peterbilt. So when a driver buys the manual, he's buying the load-bearing part of the future and leaving behind the electronics that turn an ordinary Tuesday into a $7,500 problem. Hold on to that repair number, because it's going to show up again in the dairy case at your grocery store. But first, the rule that changed everything, and almost nobody noticed when it was written. Go back to 1956. Eisenhower signs the Federal Aid Highway Act, and the interstate system starts going in. All of a sudden, a truck can leave Los Angeles in the morning and reach Chicago without ever pulling through a single downtown. Freight explodes. By 1970, the country has millions of registered commercial trucks moving on those new roads, and the transmissions that grew up right alongside that build-out were the Eaton Fuller Road Rangers, the 13 speeds first, then the 18-speed RT and RTL series. They became the sound of American long haul. Then in 1992, federal regulators created something almost nobody paid attention to at the time. It's called the E-restriction, written into Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 383.95. Here's how it works. If a person takes their CDL skills test in a truck without a clutch and gear shift, the license they walk out with legally bars them from operating a commercial vehicle with a manual transmission. Not for a year, permanently, until they go back and retest in a truck with a stick. And the Department of Transportation defines an automatic as any transmission that doesn't operate fully on the clutch and gear shift principle. which by definition sweeps in every automated manual on the road today. For 15 years, that rule just sat there in the code doing nothing. Then automation took off. The CDL schools, racing to push students through faster and cheaper, started buying automatic trucks for their training fleets and testing almost entirely on them. So today, a brand new CDL holder can walk out of the classroom with a clean license and be legally forbidden from driving the very truck that owner-operator just bought. The pool of drivers licensed to run a stick is shrinking every single month, not because people can't learn the skill, but because the testing pipeline keeps handing out licenses that only allow automatics. And this next detail makes the whole thing feel almost staged. Eaton discontinued the RTLO 18918B, the flagship 18-speed, in June of 2023. The 16918B followed the next June. The company that built the gearbox that defined American long-haul is winding it down at the exact moment. Veteran drivers are calling every salvage yard in 3 states, looking for a good used one. So the manual is disappearing for one reason, and it has nothing to do with demand. The machine that produces drivers no longer produces drivers who are legally allowed to drive it. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. I dig into the parts of this industry that nobody else bothers to explain properly. Now let's bring this into 2026, because this is where all of it collides. In 2024, the EPA finalized its Phase 3 emission standards. Starting in 2027, the limits on nitrogen oxides dropped by roughly 80%. And to hit those numbers, manufacturers are bolting on an entire new generation of after-treatment and compliance hardware. Industry analysts are projecting that a truck built in 2027 will cost $30,000 or more per unit above what the same truck cost in 2024. For an owner-operator running on margins measured in pennies per mile, that's a wall with a date on it. So what are they doing about it? They're buying older trucks, pre-emissions Peterbilt 379s and 389s, Kenworth W900s, Freightliner Classics, iron built before the cliff, hauled out of Texas and Oklahoma yards and put back on the road, and almost every one of those trucks left the factory with a manual. Mostly 13 speeds and 18 speeds. So the return to the stick is a market response you can measure, and it traces straight back to a specific federal deadline sitting on a calendar in Washington. Which brings us to the dairy case. Every gallon of milk, every loaf of bread, every tray of chicken sitting in the cold case, every cardboard box that lands on a porch, somewhere in that chain there's a Class 8 truck and a driver making a payment on it. A growing share of those drivers are owner-operators running older iron with an 18 speed. When that driver picks the manual, because an automated failure could park him for a week and cost him $7,500 a day, that decision gets priced into his rate, and his rate gets priced into the freight, and the freight gets priced into the tag on the shelf. You've been paying for his transmission choice all year without knowing it. So there are your 4 forces. The torque cut at launch, the repair math, the 1992 rule draining the driver pool, and the emissions cliff, pushing everyone into older trucks. Now for the part that actually costs people money, because plenty of drivers get every bit of that reasoning right and still lose their shirt on the switch. I've watched it happen. 5 mistakes. Mistake number 1. Buying the truck before checking your own license. This one catches guys completely cold. A driver finds a clean pre-emissions Peterbilt with an 18-speed and a rebuilt cat in it. The price is right. He's been looking for 8 months, and he wires the money the same afternoon. Then he pulls out his license and finds an E sitting in the restrictions box, because 6 years ago his company put him through a refresher and he tested in an automatic without thinking twice about it. Now he owns a $70,000 truck he cannot legally move down the road. He's got to schedule a skills test, find a manual truck to test in, which is its own problem now, and wait his turn at the DMV while the truck sits and the insurance runs. Look at your license tonight. If there's an E in that box, Clear it before you spend a dime. And if you've held the same license since the 80s and never retested, you're almost certainly fine. But go look anyway. It takes 4 seconds. Mistake number 2, underestimating how much the skill fades. A lot of the guys making this move ran a stick for 25 years, then spent the last 6 or 7 letting the automatic do the thinking. And they'll tell you it's like riding a bicycle. It isn't. Floating gears in an 18-speed loaded to 80,000 on a wet grade is a timing skill, and timing is the first thing to go. I knew a driver, 31 years behind the wheel, who bought a 379 and cooked a clutch in the first 2 weeks trying to grab a gear he used to grab in his sleep. $2,800 and 11 days out of service to learn that lesson. If you've been off a manual for more than 3 or 4 years, get seat time empty before you get seat time loaded, and get seat time loaded on flat ground before you take it into the hills. Pride has ended more transmissions than bad luck ever has. Mistake number 3, skipping the inspection because the price looked good. That $30,000 emissions savings evaporates in about a week if you buy a tired truck. A pre-emissions engine that's been run hard for 1.5 million miles and had the oil changed whenever somebody got around to it can hand you an in-frame rebuild bill that wipes out everything you thought you saved, and then some. The transmission is usually the last thing that'll fail on that truck. It's the rear ends, the front end, the wiring somebody spliced with a butt connector and electrical tape in 2011, the frame rails where a previous owner drilled holes he shouldn't have. Pay a diesel mechanic you actually trust to go through the whole thing before money changes hands. $200 for an honest inspection has saved more owner-operators than any warranty ever written. Mistake number 4, assuming somebody nearby can still work on it. This is the honest flip side of the whole argument, and I'd rather you hear it from me than find it out in a parking lot in Wyoming. Yes, an older mechanic can rebuild a Fuller in a barn. The problem is finding that mechanic. The trade is aging out fast, and the guys who know these boxes cold are retiring in numbers nobody's replacing. In a lot of regions, the shop that used to do this work now sends everything to a dealer, and the dealer's techs came up on automated units and diagnostic laptops. Before you commit to the truck, find out specifically who is going to service it and how far you'd have to tow it. A bulletproof transmission is still a paperweight if there's nobody within 300 miles who will pull it. And mistake number 5, treating this like a nostalgia project instead of a business decision. This is the one that separates the drivers who come out ahead from the ones who just lose money more slowly. The veterans making this move aren't doing it because they miss the sound. They're reading the same emissions deadline, the same repair bills, the same shrinking CDL pipeline that the manufacturers are reading, and they're arriving at a different answer. That's the whole point. So run it for your own operation. Your routes, your loads, your terrain, your region, your access to a shop. If the manual wins on that math, buy it, and don't apologize to anybody. If it doesn't, walk away. No matter how good a road ranger sounds pulling a grade at dusk, let the numbers decide, exactly the way they did. So the next time you pull in behind a semi, working its way up a long grade, you'll know what you're actually listening to. An 18-speed built to launch loads, no automated unit will pull at full torque. A federal rule quietly closing the manual driver pool, one skills test at a time. A $30,000 emissions premium pushing working drivers back toward older iron. And an automated industry whose own flagship is, by its maker's admission, a manual gearbox with a robot bolted on top. The going back isn't sentimental, it's a calculation. Those drivers are betting on their own read of where this whole thing is headed, and history has a habit of proving the guys who know their equipment right. If you want to see how these same drivers bring 130,000 pounds down a 7-mile mountain pass without ever touching the service brakes, and the engineering principle that makes that possible, that's the video I'd watch next. It'll change how you look at every truck you see coming down a grade.